The first snow of the season had just begun to fall over Jackson Hole, Wyoming, a small town known for its rugged charm and quiet resilience. Inside the local courthouse, where the heater coughed and wheezed against the chill, a name echoed through the oak-paneled walls with a weight that silenced the room. Clint Eastwood, the bailiff called, and every head turned, not toward the silver screen legend, but toward an old man with the same iconic name, a man whose weathered face wore the lines of decades spent surviving more than just harsh winters. At 82, Clint Eastwood was no movie star. He was a retired mechanic, a widower, a quiet fixture of the town who fixed people's cars for free when they couldn't pay and brought firewood to the elderly before the first frost. But today, he stood at the center of controversy, accused of a crime that made even the most hardened courtroom regulars frown in disbelief, tampering with federal property. In truth, he'd broken into a locked government facility, not to steal, but to save. 2 months earlier, the local VA clinic had announced budget cuts. One of the casualties was a tiny wing of the building housing homeless veterans during harsh winters. The locks were changed, the beds removed, and the door was closed, officially. But when the temperature dropped to near zero one night, Clint found Sam Jenkins, a Gulf War vet, curled up in an alley behind the grocery store, nearly frozen to death. So Clint picked the lock. He cleared out a storeroom, borrowed cots from the firehouse, and brought Sam and 3 other homeless vets inside. He visited daily with hot food, wool blankets, and thermoses of black coffee, asking nothing in return. Word got out, as it does in small towns, and before long, someone reported him. The door was sealed again, and Clint was arrested for trespassing on federal property. The courtroom buzzed with disbelief. The prosecution was cold, methodical. The judge, a no-nonsense Vietnam veteran named Harold Browning, tried to keep his face neutral, though the edges of his mouth twitched with something unspoken. Then came the surprise. Pam Bondi, a visiting attorney volunteering on a winter legal aid tour, stood up from the back row and approached the bench with an urgency that silenced the room again. Once Florida's Attorney General, now a fierce advocate for justice reform, Bondi wasn't supposed to be part of the proceedings. But with a quiet nod from the judge, she was granted permission to speak. She told a story. Not about Clint, not at first, but about her own father, a Korean War veteran who had once spent 3 nights in the back of a station wagon during a bitter January because his pride wouldn't let him ask for help. She spoke of the shame so many veterans carried, and the brutal irony of a system that honored service with medals and then forgot the soldier behind the uniform. Then she turned to Clint. What this man did, she said, her voice thick, wasn't a crime. It was a moral duty when the rest of us looked away. He filled a gap that shouldn't exist. The judge leaned back, his eyes fixed on Clint. In the silence that followed, Clint rose slowly. I didn't mean to break the law, he said. But I wasn't going to let them die. I fought in Korea. I've buried friends who came home only to be left behind. I couldn't watch that happen again. What happened next would ripple across the country. Judge Browning declared the charges dropped, but he didn't stop there. Instead of sentencing Mr. Eastwood, he said, I sentence this courtroom, and this community, to do better. Pam Bondi offered to fund and oversee the reopening of the shelter, pledging pro bono legal support to help veterans navigate housing and benefits. Local volunteers stepped up. News spread. Donations flooded in. A former senator offered to restore the building. A VA whistleblower exposed the neglect that had led to its closure. Within weeks, a movement was born. The new shelter was named Eastwood House, not for the actor, but for the quiet man who picked a lock and opened a door the rest of the world had closed. And Clint? He returned to his garage, fixing engines, sipping black coffee with Sam and the others who now had beds, warmth, and hope. He never sought recognition. But every year, on the first day of snow, a crowd gathered outside Eastwood House. Veterans, children, families, all sharing stories, blankets, and warm meals. Clint would stand near the fire, hat pulled low, listening. Because sometimes, the most heroic acts don't come with music or medals. They come with frostbitten fingers, borrowed cots, and the courage to do what's right when no one else will. And that day, in that courtroom, when justice chose compassion over punishment, when a law was upheld, but humanity triumphed, something shifted. A town remembered what it meant to look after its own. A nation took notice. And the world, even for just a moment, felt a little less cold. Moral of the story. True justice does not always come from the letter of the law, it often springs from the quiet, unwavering voice of conscience. In a world increasingly driven by bureaucracy, red tape, and rigid systems, we must remember that humanity was never meant to be governed solely by rules, but guided by compassion, empathy, and courage. Clint Eastwood, an aging mechanic with no wealth, fame, or platform, reminded us of a simple truth: we are our brothers and sisters' keepers. When institutions fail, when society turns a blind eye, it is the brave acts of ordinary individuals that become the turning point for change. Clint did not seek recognition, he saw suffering and stepped forward, not because it was easy or safe, but because it was right. Pam Bondi's unexpected stand in court teaches us that redemption and justice can be powerful tools when wielded by those who still believe in the good fight. Her ability to see the human being behind the supposed criminal opened a door that had been closed too long, not just for Clint, but for an entire forgotten community. The story also reminds us of the responsibility we all carry, not just to obey laws, but to question them when they forget the people they are meant to protect. It challenges us to act not from fear of punishment or hope of reward, but from love, kindness, and moral courage. In the end, it is not wealth, status, or fame that defines a hero, but the willingness to light a candle in the darkness. Clint Eastwood lit that candle, and with it, illuminated a path that others were inspired to follow. So let us be the ones who open doors. Let us be the ones who listen when the world turns away. Let us never underestimate the power of a single act of compassion to start a movement. That is the legacy of Clint's story, and it can be ours too, if we choose to act not out of obligation, but from the deep, unshakable belief that love is the most powerful force we have.